For many years, it was believed that the answers to all of our questions about how we develop and how our behaviors emerge in very early life lied in our genes. Many people support this idea. Individuals such as Noam Chomsky believe that our behaviors, such as language, are hardwired into our systems, and that the information for this hardwiring is found in our genes and our genes alone. However, there's a new field called epigenetics that's changing these ideas significantly and forcing us to reimagine the possibilities in the field of psychology and beyond. We're here today in FIU's Sky Lounge to demonstrate a very important point about what epigenetics actually is. The tall columns you see here can be represented as strands of individual DNA. The individual links represent individual genes and chromosomes. You see hanging in those individual links air plants, hundreds of them. These can be thought of as histones or proteins that surround and constrict how the gene is processed by RNA. In essence, these air plants are part of the epigenetic system, meaning things above the gene that guide and constrain what the gene does. Now, the analogy doesn't stop here. The strands of DNA, or the columns of metal, are attached to the ceiling, being supported by the building itself. The ceiling and the building both represent epigenetic influences. A cell wall, for example. And outside of the building itself, the atmosphere, the air, represent all of the hormonal and cellular milieu that come into contact with the genes through the cells themselves. We're here in the Developmental Psychobiology Lab at Florida International University to show you how we use the concept of epigenetics in our research every single day. Right here are our incubators. We hatch about 200 bobwhite quail here every single week for our research purposes. Now, a question that we get asked all the time is, why do you use bobwhite quail in your research? They're a very precocial species, bobwhite quail. They hatch in 26 days, which means you have many subjects very rapidly. And also they're precocial, meaning when they hatch, they're like miniature versions of adults. They can move around, they can vocalize, they can hear, see, smell, and touch, very much like an adult can. So in that way, we can see if anything that we've done to manipulate their prenatal environment carries over into their behavior in the postnatal environment. Now, specifically, my research involves the subject of hormones. What I do is inject a very small amount of progesterone. It's a maternal hormone that's injected into eggs naturally in bobwhite quail and other bird species as well. And what I've found is if you elevate the level of progesterone that's found in the egg very, very slightly and not manipulating the gene in any way, what happens postnatally is the birds do not learn as well as birds that have not received this type of injection or elevation of hormone. And what this research really drives home is that you don't necessarily have to make a large adjustment to the prenatal environment. You can make very small adjustments and have very significant outcomes that last several generations. In essence, what happens to this generation of quail can be passed on to several generations. And this is outside the influence of the gene completely. And research like this in our lab happens all the time. We manipulate the sights, the sounds, and even the smells that they experience prenatally to see how that prenatal experience affects them postnatally. And we can apply this type of information, this type of research, even over to the human realm of research. As a matter of fact, our lab pioneered what's called kangaroo care. And that is when hospitals have a preterm infant that's delivered. We found in our lab that the quails do not like any type of light or sound after they're born prematurely. So what we found in the quail can actually be applied to human beings. It's actually pretty exciting stuff. It's in every hospital in the country now. But this is only some of the ways in which epigenetics can actually influence not only the research that we're doing here at our lab, but policy on a grand scale in our country. So by now, we know what epigenetics is. We know how we apply it here in the lab. But what I really wanted to speak to today is the significance that epigenetics holds not only for the field of psychology, but for science as a whole. Everybody learns about the nature versus nurture argument in psychology. Intro psychology classes teach this subject every single year. Now, what epigenetics has done is efficiently and effectively ended the nature versus nurture argument. For many years, it was assumed that who we are, our behaviors, are a combination of things from nature, meaning your genes and biological systems, combined with some things from nurture, meaning your mother's behavior, your father's behavior, how you interact with your social structures, and so on. But what epigenetics does is completely ignores the dichotomous nature of the nature versus nurture argument. See, in reality, at least the way that epigenetics researchers see it, is that epigenetics takes nature and nurture and combines the two of them together, really making them inseparable from each other. So there aren't certain things that are caused by the way that you were raised, or certain things just caused by your genes. In reality, it's not so much of a separation between the two. But therein lies the problem. It becomes very complicated once you think about it. If you start from the genetic level, all the way at the bottom, at the very base of our cells and our systems and how those are constructed, you need to work your way all the way up to the environmental influences that surround and constrain it. And you have to understand at each of these levels the interactions that are going on. So for example, the interactions between a gene and the protein surrounding the gene. And above that, you have cellular systems. Above that, you have organ systems, the brain, the body, and all the way up to the environment, and so on. And what epigenetics does is encompasses all of those systems. So really, what you're looking at here is a very complicated mess in some ways, but also a very exciting new promise for what epigenetics can offer the field of psychology. For many, many years, we've been sequestering ourselves in our own individual disciplines. Biology separate from philosophy, separate from psychology, separate from physics, and so on. But what epigenetics is doing is forcing us to take a more global stance. It's really focusing our efforts together, because without that, we're left wondering, well, what happens at the genetic level? What happens at the cellular level? How does the neuron influence behavior? And how does the interaction between the neuron and the body influence behavior and our development? These are questions that we need to start asking. More importantly, we need to really emphasize the progressive and cooperative nature of the field of psychology to bring it into a brand new horizon that literally has limitless possibilities for what we can learn, what we can understand, and how we can apply it to better our world.